Hi everyone, welcome to another Hatton's Model Railway SkillsCast session where we show you the skills needed to transform your layout into a model railway. And it's part 2 of our Fitting Locomotive Crew to Locomotive series. Today we're looking at more modern locomotives covering diesels, electrics and multiple units from the late 1950s right through to the current day. I'll be showing you some of the figures that we can offer for these different eras, how to fit them to the individual locomotives, and some do's and don'ts of where to fit particular people in particular uniforms in particular locomotives too. I'll be showing you some of the skills right here on the show, and if you've got any questions at all regarding the items we have available or the skills that I'm showing you, please do ask them in the chat and I'll answer as many as I can throughout the stream. Otherwise, if you're watching a little later on, feel free to put any comments you have in the comment section below or get in touch with our customer experience team who would be more than happy to help you out. For those who've watched part 1, we'll be recapping a lot of the skills that we learnt in the previous session. But for those of you joining us for the first time in part 2, get your tools ready, get your workbench set up, and we'll get started on fitting some of these locomotives up with crew. Now, for me, fitting diesels and electrics is just as important as fitting steam locomotives with crew. Although some of them do have quite small cabs that it's hard to see into, it really does still enhance the effect on certain locomotives and is an absolute benefit to pretty much any item you can put on your railway. We have figures available in N gauge, OO and O gauge, and there's other figures available from other suppliers to cover different scales out there too. The only thing to bear in mind with the diesel and electric era is you have to be a bit more imaginative with your figures. Whereas with steam locomotive crews, we've seen in our previous video that there are sets readily available covering drivers and firemen. In the mainstream market, there isn't quite as many available for different drivers and second men uniforms as carried in the diesel fleet. So looking at some of the items we have available, we do still have BR style staff. You can see in the BR traditional uniforms there from the 1960s and 1970s. We have modern trackside workers, and we have some more British Rail staff from the 80s and the 1990s there too. So with a little bit of adaptation, these are still ideal to use as some figures for our locomotives, and we'll be covering a little bit of the chopping and changing that we need to do in today's session. I've already started getting some of our locomotives opened up and ready. And if you're looking at more tips on how to do that, check out our opening locomotives video, which is available on our YouTube channel and Facebook page. But enough talk, let's get started. We'll start with the earliest locomotive we've got here today. This is a Class 17 as running in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Now, if you're a modeler of the BR Green era, if you still like having steam locomotives alongside your diesels, you will have 2 people to put in your cab. Both the diesel driver and the second man would both be employed in the front of the locomotive at this time, with the guard located in the separate brake van at the back of the train. That was a policy until the late 1960s. I can't remember the exact year, I'm afraid, but it did go over to single person working in the cabs around that time. So for these earlier models, you do have to fit the 2 different people in there. So let's head over to that now, and I'll open up our Class 17. So this is a really simple removal of the cab, and you can see that we've got the seat there. The cab doesn't actually extend the whole way down either, so it extends to just where the top of the seat is there. You can see on our other side here with the dual cab controls of these locomotives that this is a low relief cab. It still looks really effective when the cab itself is on, the cab top, but we will need to do a little bit of chop and changing, as otherwise our chosen figure, as we see here, is not going to fit as they come out of the packet. So it's always worth a quick check just to make sure what the actual interior is like. So again, study some real life photos of these locomotives to see where the drivers would be. This chap is a station staff member, but in his 1960s uniform, I still think he's completely appropriate for this locomotive, with his hand outstretched to operate some of the controls in the cab. We'll just need to do a little bit of, shall we call it, plastic surgery to make sure he will fit. Again, just checking how he's going to fit in there against the height of the loco. And just bear in mind, you can only do this once, so make sure you get it about right, or take away a little bit at a time until you are happy. I've previously measured this guy, so I know exactly where I need to cut, but you can take away little bits until you get to the correct height. So just a firm, straight down cut, we'll see the legs disappear, or they certainly should do. Might just take a couple of cuts. There we go. So a little bit of dangerous surgery today. Obviously, make sure you keep yourself safe and well when you're using a knife. And then you could just file that down there if you wanted to. For the purposes of today's video, I'm just going to get in straight in there into our cab. So you can either use glue, or as we had in yesterday's session, if you're not looking at making this a permanent arrangement, you can use grey or black tack or tacky wax, which we do sell too, and put this on the bottom of our driver figure. Now, this doesn't look as good cosmetically, and you may find that it'll come loose over time. But if you want to return your locomotives to original condition or take the crew out from time to time, this is the best way to have your figures removable in the locomotives. So let's get a bit of our tack and let's get that on the bottom of our driver figure and let's get him installed in our locomotive. The first one we've got today, the Class 17. So just on the bottom there where we've carried out a little bit of surgery, just put in a small amount of the grey tack, and then it really is as simple as just placing him in place, putting our cab back on, and we have a driver figure there. As you can see, for an initial fit, he would need to be taken down a little bit more as he's still a little bit too tall. So we need to take some further inches off our miniature figure there, but we've already enhanced this locomotive now by adding our driver figure into the cab there. You can also enhance the cab detail more by painting it up if you wished, and we may cover that in a future video. But for the purposes of today, we now have a driver in our first locomotive there. And don't worry, I'll make sure he's feeling safe and well afterwards too. Might even put his legs back on if he is lucky. And this is what you'll find with a lot of locomotives, especially when it comes to diesels and electrics. You will find that they have the seats already in there, so you do need to perform some minor surgery to your figures to make sure they fit into a lot of the locomotives. I'll show you another example here now. This is the cab of the inside of one of our Hatton's Originals Class 66 locomotives. You get a huge amount of detail in these, which is great to enhance on the locomotives. But again, if we were putting our driver figure in, this modern chap I've found here with the high-vis vest on, we would need to remove his legs there, as otherwise he just doesn't quite fit. As you can see, it is a little bit of a struggle. And with how the models are made, they're not really flexible to put on. If we look at some more modern locomotives, as you can see, I'll just bring up a picture of a Class 66 now. Taking inspiration from this real-life locomotive, you can see the position of the driver there on the left-hand side of the cab. It's facing towards us there. And this is the commonplace for crews to be fitted on UK locomotives. So the driver, I think it's a very, very rare case. I can't actually think of one off the top of my head, actually. But I can't really think of a case of where the driver would be on the right of a locomotive, although some locomotives do have dual controls on either side of the cab to help with shunting. In most cases, the driver does sit on the left-hand side of the cab in the direction of travel, so really easy to remember in that case. With us being right up to date in the modern era now, we have one single worker in the front of the cab there. You may find at this time that the guard or the shunter travels in the rear cab of the locomotive when it is in motion on certain services, and this is something you may wish to install too, but these are fewer and further between now. It mainly is just a single person operation on the 21st century railway. So let's adapt our next figure for our next cab, and it's very similar to the operation we have formed before. Head back over to the workbench there. Just again, have a good look at them at a good couple of angles just to make sure we know exactly where we're going to need to cut. As again, you don't get any second chances with cutting these. So just figure out the best way to do that. And then again, it's going to be a short, sharp bit of pressure and a slice to remove the legs from this figure. Sometimes, as you can see, you do take a couple of goes due to the sturdiness of the resin, and you can just give that a little bit of a twist to break. But as with a lot of them, they do prove quite stubborn. You can also use, if you've got them, some of these Euron track cutters too, which are a really good way of doing this. Sometimes, as you can see here, the knife just hasn't got the right amount of pressure in the right place to do it. There we go. That's one leg off. We'll now just try for the second while we're here. Get the right amount of pressure in place. Sorry, I know this is a little shaky on the camera. I'm really putting the most pressure down here I can do. And then that would need a little bit more cleaning up, but we'll give him a trial fit. It's always good to do a trial fit with a little bit of the grey tack, just to make sure they sit in the place we want them to before we install them properly. Just make sure that goes in the correct position on the rear of the figure against the chair there. And there we go. It is a bit rough and ready. It'd look a lot better with the glue in place, but we can see now that he's in the correct position once we install him back in our Class 66 locomotive. So we'll put him there ready. We'll get him a bit of glue later so he can sit on that particular item. Good comment there from Steve as well. You can use a Dremel to do that. I wouldn't really recommend bending them with heat mono. It would be better to take them off if you can do them. Because of the position of the cabs in the locomotive, it's very rare that you'll actually see where the legs are meant to be too, so it doesn't really spoil the illusion either. But you don't always have to have your figures on the inside of the locomotives, especially in the transition era, but still seen out there occasionally on models and on real life locomotives in the 21st century. You will see shunter figures riding on the sides and steps of locomotives, moving around yards as a quick way, without getting into the cab, of being moved around, almost using the shunting locomotive that's moving anyway as a bit of a taxi to get them to the other end of the yard or the premises too. As mentioned, this is quite a rarity now in 2020, but certainly in the 1950s and 1960s, this was a common occurrence on Class 08 locomotives and similar designs to this, and still seen occasionally on industrial locomotives, as with this Harry Needle Class 07 here. So I've got an appropriate shunter figure. This again is one of the track worker gangs that is available. And we'll be attaching him on the front step of this locomotive there and making sure that he stays on and is heading to his next duties. Now, do bear in mind that if you're fitting any figures to the sides of your locomotive, such as this, that they won't foul any of the platforms or other structures on your layout before installing them. So we'll get a bit of glue on this. I've got a little bit of paper here, little bit of plastic paper that I've just got discarded. So just put some super glue on there. Would recommend super glue for this if you have it available, or you can use some of the other glues that are available, such as the rocket glue and other designs. Just make sure we get some of that out there. Regular viewers of our videos will know that my top tip when it comes to gluing is always get a little bit here and then use a cocktail stick to apply it to your model. It really gives you great control over the amount of glue that you are using. So I'll just put some on the end there, and again, very gently, just on the feet of our figure. We don't need to chop this chap down. He manages to get away without surgery today to fit on our locomotive. So I'll just put that onto the steps there. Give it a couple of seconds to bond, making sure we're not touching where the glue is drying, otherwise we'll become attached to it ourselves too. And there we go. He's now in place on the side of our locomotive and in an authentic position, mainly for 1960s and 1950s, as I mentioned, but also usable on particular locomotives in industry. And as SLD 51's mentioned there, you can see it quite often in other countries too. So if you are an international modeler, this is something that does still take place out there, Maybe not so much in the UK anymore, but certainly as part of a railway in the 21st century in other countries. As for actually getting the bodies off and into the cabs, it really can depend on each loco that you see. Now, some instructions are included with the locomotives, but I'll give you a couple of top tips to see how these come available. I'll just take the top of our Class 33 diesel here. And what you will generally find, although in that case it's already come clear, which is good news, you will generally find that the cabs are clipped in to the locomotive's cabs, and these need either flexing out, but do be careful when you do this, as you may cause some damage to your locomotive. Do refer to the instructions, and if you're not too sure or you don't feel too confident, feel free to get in touch either by leaving a comment or getting in touch with our customer experience team, who can give some guidance on getting inside locomotives such as this. But once they're unclipped, they do come safely away as per so, as a separate unit that you see here. And then we're left with the cab interior that we can then amend and change to our heart's content. So we could even paint this up with some more details, or for our last figure today, we can drop down one more chap and make sure he goes in our cab. So I'll just move our Class 07 out of the way there with our new shunter safely on board. I'll bring you over to the smaller camera there again. And into the 1980s and 1990s, the uniforms did start to slightly change. So we lost more of the British Rail jackets as we see here, although these did remain quite prominent. And the shirt and tie, as seen here, with no jacket, and of course the high visibility vest, did become more commonplace towards the turn of the 21st century. As we can see here on some examples with the two crew members here with this Class 47 locomotive in recent years. And again, looking at our Class 66 there with our single driver working on this particular service. So bringing you back over, I'll just show you one last time on chopping down the figure. Again, just making absolutely certain that we know where we need him to be cut. So it is going to be just at the top of the legs again this time. It's great to get them along side by side and comparing to real life photos so we can see where these particular figures are. So we've already had a great few suggestions from people on how to cut these. We've had Dremels mentioned. We've also had other tools and items out there too. Again, just being very, very sturdy with our knife. We can achieve a cut there. Again, we might need to cut a little bit more off, but we'll do a trial fit just to make sure that's the case. So before we get to our glue, just a tiny bit of grey tack again, which you can pick up from us if you do need any grey tack at all. And you can see there already, much too tall. He really needs taking right down, probably just to underneath where his tie is. And that shows you the importance of taking away a little bit, seeing how it fits, then taking away a little bit again and again, just to make sure they are the perfect height. If you wanted to, you can put the cab back in at this stage and see how the figure actually looks once they are inserted in the locomotive. Just make sure you've got a good amount of the grey tack so they survive the trip inside to the loco. And you can just position them in there to see how they look. But as we see already, he's in there, but he's not too bad a place, actually. Now we've put him into place. He's in a good position, maybe a little bit too forward, but we can certainly do some tweaks there to make sure he is exactly where we need him to be. If you wished as well, and your loco allows it, you can put a bit of glue onto the rear of the figure to make sure it stays in place even more permanently. But if you're looking at removing them, it may be best to use grey tack, as we have seen here. And again, maybe chopping a couple of other little bits and pieces, cutting down the height a little bit there to get a more accurate height balance on this locomotive. But I hope that's given you some pointers. I hope that's given you some clues to getting figures into your locomotives. Even on engines where you can't quite see into the cab, you will be very surprised on just how visible they are when your locomotive is operating on a layout. And certainly with some of the locomotives with larger windows, such as the Class 66 that we saw previously, you really can see the difference between having a person in the cab driving the locomotive. Another example here being the Class 52 Western locomotives with their big open front windows. It makes all the difference to have a driver in there and really transforms a model from looking like a model to a real life miniature locomotive. So I hope you've learned some skills today. I hope you've seen some of the options and opportunities that are really easy to do with just some simple modification of the figures that we have available right now. All the figures that I've used today and more besides are available right now from hattons.co.uk, starting at around £6 for a pack of 4. So do head over and see if there are any suitable figures for you. We've made some mention of the different uniform styles and the changes in operational staff and how many staff you need in each locomotive from the 1960s to now. But if you'd like any particular advice on a certain locomotive, on a certain type of train from a certain era, feel free to leave a comment on our video or get in touch with our customer experience team, who will be more than happy to give you any guidance that you do need. Otherwise, make sure to click that link in the description to see all the items that I've talked about today, which can be ordered from us right now. That includes the glue, the locomotives, the tools used there too, all of which are available right now from hattons.co.uk. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Facebook page for more SkillsCast sessions such as this. Part 1 of the locomotive crew, which we featured fitting crew to steam locomotives. If you missed it, it's available right now. If you joined us for the first one, I hope you enjoyed part 2 too. And in the future, we will be covering fitting passenger figures and freight staff to wagons and coaches too. So keep an eye on our channel for those videos coming through. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.